A poor girl sneaked into the company, caused chaos, and made the CEO fall hopelessly in love. Before going into the video, please leave us a like and a subscribe so we have the motivation to make the next videos. Lena Carter had one goal, one chance, and one letter. Standing in front of Kingston Global, the most powerful business empire in the city, she clutched a crumpled envelope in her hands. It wasn't just any letter. It was her last hope. Her clothes told a different story than the gleaming towers in front of her. Her jeans were faded, her shoes had seen better days, and her oversized hoodie swallowed her frame. But none of that mattered. She was here for a reason. This was for her father, the man who had spent years working under Kingston Global before being unfairly dismissed. He had sacrificed everything for this company, and now Lena would fight to make things right. But how was she going to deliver the letter directly to the CEO when the closest she had ever been to a high-rise was watching them from across the street? She took a deep breath. All right, Lena, you've got this. Be confident, be smart, and most importantly, don't cause any trouble. Easy, right? Wrong. The first obstacle wasn't security. It wasn't the receptionist. It was the revolving door. Lena stepped in with full determination, but somehow managed to push in the wrong direction. Instead of gliding smoothly into the lobby, she got stuck in an endless spin, her backpack caught between the glass panels. Hey, kid, are you okay in there? An old man watching from the street called out. Lena panicked, pushing harder, but ended up going backwards instead of forwards. By the time she finally escaped the cursed door, she stumbled right into the sleek marble lobby, only to crash into the receptionist's desk, sending a container of pens flying into the air. The receptionist, a woman with impeccable red lipstick and an expression colder than a stock market crash, raised an unimpressed eyebrow. May I help you? She asked, barely concealing her disapproval. Lena scrambled to gather the pens, stuffing them back into the cup as quickly as she could. Hi, yes, I have a letter for Mr. Kingston. It's urgent. The receptionist sighed. Do you have an appointment? Lena blinked. No, but I promise, if he reads this, he'll want to see me. And the receptionist didn't blink. Do you have a badge? Lena hesitated. Well, no, but an invitation? A security pass? A clearance code? Lena clutched the letter tighter. I have enthusiasm? Before the receptionist could respond, a towering security guard appeared beside her, arms crossed. No badge, no entry. Uh-oh. Lena's heart pounded. She needed to act fast. At that moment, a group of well-dressed employees walked past, heading towards the elevators. Without thinking, she ducked her head, grabbed a random folder off the receptionist's desk, and slipped in behind them. The security guard shouted, "Hey, stop!" But it was too late. Lena had darted inside the open elevator, and before anyone could catch her, the doors slammed shut. She leaned against the cool steel wall, panting. The other employees eyed her suspiciously. Lena quickly pretended to read the stolen folder, nodding seriously like she was deep in thought. Yes, very fascinating numbers. Incredibly businessy things. The man next to her squinted. Who are you? Oh, I'm new, she blurted out. First day, super excited, just love the economy. Before anyone could question her further, the elevator dinged and Lena bolted out onto a random floor. She had no idea where she was. People rushed around with headsets, screens flashing stock prices, and important-looking executives whispering over documents. Lena took 2 steps. Then disaster struck. She tripped over a cable, knocked over a coffee cart, and somehow managed to set off a fire alarm while trying to steady herself. Screams, coffee everywhere, papers flying, alarms blaring. Who is that? Someone shouted. Lena froze, then she saw it. The biggest door at the end of the hall. That had to be it, the CEO's office. With no other option, she sprinted toward it, skidding inside just as the security team burst onto the floor. And that was how Lena Carter crashed, literally into the office of Adrian Kingston, the most powerful CEO in the city. Adrian Kingston had been expecting a meeting with a board member. He had not been expecting a girl with wild hair, a dirt-streaked hoodie, and coffee stains on her jeans to slide across his expensive carpet and land at his feet, clutching a crumpled letter. Lena looked up at him. He looked down at her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, with as much dignity as she could muster, Lena stood up, dusted herself off, and held out the letter. Kingston, I have something important for you. Adrian slowly set down the document he had been reading. I can see that. I know this looks bad, but I swear I'm not crazy. Adrian raised an eyebrow. You just set off my company's fire alarm, hijacked an elevator, and stormed into my office like a medieval messenger delivering an urgent battle report. And you're telling me you're not crazy? Lena hesitated. Okay, maybe a little. Adrian sighed. Sit down. Lena's heart leaped. He was giving her a chance. She sank into the plush leather chair, clutching the letter like it held the fate of the universe. Little did she know this was only the beginning, because from this moment on, Adrian Kingston's perfectly structured world would never be the same again. Do you think Lena will win Adrian over? Or will she be kicked out before she even finishes explaining? Comment below. If you love a good underdog story, hit that like button to support Lena's wild journey. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting, emotional, and hilarious stories. This is only the beginning. Adrian Kingston was not a man who welcomed surprises. His life was measured, calculated, predictable. Every second planned out, every decision deliberate. He ran Kingston Global with the precision of a machine, and there was no room for chaos. Which is why, when Lena Carter quite literally crashed into his office, everything changed. He had been expecting an executive, a polished, well-dressed board member. Instead, in front of his desk, on her knees, clutching a crumpled letter like it held the secrets of the universe, was a girl who looked like she had fought a tornado and lost. Her hoodie was stained with coffee, her jeans were torn at the knees, and her sneakers, if they could still be called that, looked like they had walked through 1,000 miles of bad decisions. Adrian set down his documents slowly, very slowly. Lena, still panting from her disastrous journey through his company, forced a smile. Hey, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Adrian leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his crisp, tailored suit. And which foot was the right one, Boris? He asked, voice dangerously calm. Lena hesitated. Okay, not the best start. She quickly stood up, too quickly. Her knee slammed into his desk, causing her to yelp and clutch her leg as she wobbled in place. Adrian's eyebrow twitched upward. Would you like to try again? Lena cleared her throat, determined to act professional, even if she looked like a disaster in human form. Mr. Kingston, I have a letter for you, Sigum. She stretched her arm forward, presenting it as if it were the key to world peace. Adrian did not take it. So instead of using the mail or booking an appointment like a sane person, you chose to hijack my elevator, destroy my lobby, and infiltrate my office like a rogue agent from an action movie? Lena's mouth opened, then closed. When you say it like that, it sounds bad. That's because it is bad. Lena exhaled through her nose, then shook the letter in front of him. Look, I know I may have caused a little bit of a scene, but this is important. Adrian still didn't move. He simply watched her, studying her like she was a puzzle missing half its pieces. Lena's heart pounded. If he didn't read this, then everything she had done, the chaos, the embarrassment, the risk, would be for nothing. This was her only chance to fight for her father. She took a breath and did something incredibly reckless. She marched around his desk, grabbed his hand, and forced the letter into his palm. The room went dead silent. The air crackled with tension. Adrian Kingston, CEO, billionaire, a man feared in every boardroom in the country, was staring down at his hand as if he had never been physically handed anything in his life. Lena swallowed. Too much? Adrian slowly looked up at her. His expression was unreadable. And then he did something no one in his office had ever seen before. He laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not a scoff, a real, genuine laugh. Lena froze, eyes widening. What the hell just happened? Adrian Kingston did not laugh. Ever, and yet here he was, shaking his head in amusement, staring at this girl, this clumsy, unpredictable, completely ridiculous girl who had barged into his life like a hurricane. Finally, he sighed and unfolded the letter. All right, Lena Carter, let's see what's so important. Lena let out a shaky breath as he started reading, and for the first time since stepping into this building, she felt hopeful. She had done it. She had gotten his attention. Now all she had to do, Mucko, was convince him to care. Lena Carter wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this high-rise building, not sitting at this tiny desk squished between a copier and a water cooler, and definitely not employed by one of the most powerful companies in the city. And yet, somehow, miraculously, impossibly, she was. The moment Adrian Kingston read her letter, something shifted. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was amusement. Maybe it was the fact that Lena was the first person in years to stand in his office, completely unafraid of him. Whatever it was, he hired her on the spot, and that was the beginning of the most chaotic era in Kingston Global's history. Lena arrived 20 minutes early, wearing a slightly wrinkled button-down she had borrowed from her best friend and a pair of slacks that were one size too big. She took a deep breath before stepping onto the executive floor. This was her chance. She wasn't going to mess it up. Then she tripped over the rug, not a little stumble, a full-body wipeout. As she face-planted in front of the entire department, her brand-new employee ID badge flew off her collar, skidding across the floor. A horrified silence fell over the room. Then a slow, sarcastic clap. Lena groaned before even looking up. She already knew who it was. Adrian Kingston, standing in front of his office, arms crossed, an amused smirk playing at his lips. "Congratulations, Carter," he said dryly. "That's the most dramatic entrance an employee has ever made on their first day." Lena lifted her face from the floor, cheeks burning. "Happy to set records, boss." Kingston Global was not the kind of place where people laughed. It was sleek, efficient, and intimidating. Every employee walked with purpose, phones glued to their ears, dressed like they had stepped out of a luxury fashion ad. Lena didn't exactly blend in. She took lunch at the wrong time, accidentally walked into the boardroom mid-meeting, and mistook the head of HR for a delivery guy. Worse, she refused to change. On her second day, she brought a bag of snacks and shared them with the interns. On her third day, she redecorated her tiny desk with a tiny cactus and a sticky note that read, "Professional button pusher." By the end of the week, people started smiling when they passed her desk. And Adrian Kingston? He started watching her, not in the waiting for you to mess up way, in the why do you make this place feel different way. And he couldn't decide if that was a good thing or a terrible mistake. The real trouble started when Adrian made the mistake of asking Lena for coffee. It was a simple request, a routine test for new employees. Lena, being Lena, took it way too seriously. She marched into the break room like it was a battlefield. She examined every single coffee pod like a scientist about to make a groundbreaking discovery. She accidentally pressed the wrong button on the machine, causing it to explode hot espresso all over the counters. Panicked, she tried to stop the flood by pressing more buttons. That only made it worse. By the time the machine gave its final dying breath, the entire counter was covered in coffee, milk foam, and Lena's pride. She stared at the destruction. Well, that escalated quickly. Adrian appeared in the doorway, took one look at the mess, and let out a long, slow sigh. "Carter, this was a test. You failed." Lena nodded solemnly. "That's fair, but in my defense, I'm more of a tea person." Adrian closed his eyes, massaging his temples. "Of course you are." Adrian Kingston was a man of logic. Every decision he made was calculated, efficient, and beneficial to the company. Hiring Lena Carter? It was none of those things. And yet, the office had changed. Laughter, once rare, became a daily occurrence. Employees stopped walking like robots and started actually talking to each other. Even Adrian himself, the once unshakable CEO, found himself amused. Maybe it was the way Lena threw herself into every task, even when she had no idea what she was doing. Maybe it was the way she looked at problems, not with the frustration, but with determination. Or maybe it was the fact that, for the first time in years, Adrian Kingston felt something other than stress. He felt alive. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. One afternoon, after a particularly chaotic attempt at organizing files, which ended with an entire shelf collapsing, Adrian pulled Lena aside. "Carter," he said, tone unreadable. Lena straightened. "Yes, boss?" "So why are you still here?" Lena frowned. "Because you hired me?" "No," Adrian shook his head. "I mean, why do you keep trying? This job isn't easy for you. People look at you like you don't belong. You could leave. So why don't you?" Lena swallowed. She could have given him a million different excuses. She could have joked, could have brushed it off. But instead, she told him the truth. Because my father worked here, and this company threw him away like he didn't matter. Adrian stiffened. Your father? Lena nodded. I'm not here for the money. I'm not here to impress anyone. I'm here because someone I loved gave everything to this company, and I refuse to let his name be forgotten. Silence stretched between them. For the first time, Adrian Kingston felt off balance, because he had never seen this side of her before. This wasn't the clumsy girl who spilled coffee and knocked over bookshelves. This was a woman with a purpose. And in that moment, everything changed. Adrian Kingston had always believed in logic over emotions, control over chaos, order over unpredictability. He was a man who ran his life and his business with an iron will. He didn't have time for distractions, for meaningless laughter, for moments that didn't push his company forward. And yet, Lena Carter was in every moment now. Everywhere he turned, she was there. She wasn't polished like the executives in his company. She didn't have an impressive resume or a degree from a prestigious university. She wasn't meant to belong in his world, but she did. Because somehow, in the short time since she had stormed into his office, his world had started revolving around her. And that terrified him. It started with the small things. He caught himself watching her more than he should, not just because he was waiting for her next inevitable disaster, but because she fascinated him. The way she always found a way to laugh at herself. The way she treated everyone, from the janitor to the CFO, with the same kindness. The way she refused to be intimidated by him when everyone else in the company barely dared to meet his gaze. Lena Carter was different, and that difference was dangerous because Adrian knew that once he let himself care, there would be no going back. It wasn't just him. Lena felt it too. She didn't understand why Adrian had stopped treating her like just another employee, why his usual sarcasm had softened into something else, why his stares had grown longer, heavier, filled with something she couldn't name. At first, she thought she was imagining it, but then there were moments where their banter turned into something deeper, moments where his hand would linger for a second too long when he handed her a file, moments where the office faded, the world quieted, and it was just them. And Lena wasn't sure she could handle it. Because falling for Adrian Kingston? That would be the worst mistake of her life, and yet her heart didn't seem to care. It happened on an evening when most of the office had gone home. Adrian had stayed late to finalize an important contract. Lena had stayed late because she had accidentally deleted half a spreadsheet and was desperately trying to recover it before anyone found out. She didn't expect to find Adrian still at his desk, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, looking exhausted in a way she had never seen before. She hesitated at the door. You okay, boss? He looked up, and for the first time, he didn't have a sharp comeback. Instead, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, Carter. Am I? That threw her off. Adrian Kingston, the man who always had an answer for everything, sounded lost. And against her better judgment, she stepped inside. Want to talk about it? He smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. Do I seem like the type to talk about my feelings? Lena shrugged, dropping into the chair across from him. Nope, but I seem like the type to ignore boundaries and make you do it anyway. For the first time in hours, he laughed, and then he actually started talking. About how the board was pushing him to expand faster than he was comfortable with. About how the pressure of being perfect had weighed on him for years. About how lately, for the first time, he wasn't sure if he was making the right choices anymore. Lena listened, really listened, and then, in the simplest, most Lena way possible, she spoke the words that shook him to his core. You don't have to be perfect all the time, Adrian. He froze. She had never called him by his first name before, and the way it sounded on her lips, soft, familiar, real, broke something inside of him. She realized her mistake too late. Their eyes locked. The air shifted, and suddenly it wasn't just a conversation anymore. It was something else, something Lena wasn't ready for. She stood abruptly, knocking over a pen in the process. I should go. Adrian stood too quickly. His hand caught her wrist before she could walk away. Carter. It was a plea, a hesitation, a moment of undeniable, unspoken truth. Lena's pulse pounded, and for one terrifying, thrilling second, she thought he was going to kiss her. She almost wanted him to. But then, Reality crashed back in. She pulled away. Good night, boss. And then she left, leaving Adrian staring after her, heart racing, knowing that nothing between them would ever be the same again. But neither of them noticed the pair of sharp eyes watching from the doorway. Natasha Montgomery, Adrian's ex-fiancée. She had returned to the company, claiming she wanted to discuss business deals, investments, the future. But what she had really been doing was watching. And she had seen every front, the looks, the tension, the way Adrian only ever smiled when Lena was around. And Natasha wouldn't allow it. Not when she had spent years planning her way back into Adrian's life. Not when some nobody was threatening to take what should have been hers. A slow, calculating smile spread across her lips. "Oh, darling," she murmured to herself. "You have no idea what you've just gotten yourself into." Lena Carter had fought every step of the way to get where she was. She had endured the judgmental stares, the whispered conversations behind her back, and the constant reminder that she didn't belong in Kingston Global. But none of that compared to what was coming. Because Natasha Montgomery wasn't just any enemy. She was calculated, cold, vicious, and she had one goal: to tear Lena down before she got too close to Adrian Kingston. It started with a rumor. Lena arrived at work feeling lighter than usual. Maybe it was because, for the first time, she felt like she was truly making progress. Not just in her job, but with Adrian too. But the moment she stepped onto the executive floor, something was off. People stared. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as she walked past. And then she heard it. "Did you hear? Apparently she only got this job because she blackmailed someone." Lena's stomach dropped. She turned toward the voices, catching glimpses of employees leaning in close, whispering, "She probably has dirt on Mr. Kingston. That's why he's always defending her. I heard she faked her qualifications. She doesn't even have a proper degree." Lena felt her chest tighten. This wasn't just office gossip. This was an attack, and she already knew who was behind it. Natasha Montgomery stood at the far end of the hallway, watching with a smirk on her perfectly painted lips. She wasn't stupid. She had played this game 100 times before. If she wanted to get rid of someone, she didn't need direct confrontation. She just needed to turn the world against them. And Lena? She was just another temporary obstacle. A girl who didn't belong. A girl Natasha was going to crush. By the end of the day, Lena felt like a ghost in her own office. Her co-workers avoided her. Emails that used to come her way were suddenly redirected to other people. Even the cafeteria, once filled with friendly banter, now felt like hostile territory. She wanted to pretend it didn't hurt, but it did, because Lena Carter had fought so hard to prove she deserved to be here. And now, in the span of a single day, it felt like she was back at square one. And the worst part? Adrian hadn't said a word. She hadn't seen him all day. Had he heard the rumors? Did he believe them? That thought was like a knife to her chest. Lena couldn't take it anymore. She stormed into Adrian's office, not bothering to knock. He was at his desk reviewing documents, but the moment he saw her, he knew. Her face was flushed with frustration, her hands clenched at her sides. "You heard it, didn't you?" she asked, voice shaking. Adrian sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I did." Lena felt her heart drop. He had known, and he hadn't done anything. "So?" she pressed, arms crossed. "Do you believe it?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "Of course not." Lena blinked. "Then why didn't you say anything?" Adrian let out a slow breath, rubbing his temples. "Because I wanted to see what you would do." Lena stared at him. "What I would do? You think this is a game? My reputation is being dragged through the dirt while you sit here waiting for me to figure it out?" For the first time, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt. He had messed up. Because Lena wasn't like the people in his world. She wasn't used to these games. She had fought her way here with nothing but her own strength, and she shouldn't have had to fight alone. "I should have shut it down before it even started," Adrian admitted. Lena swallowed the lump in her throat. "Yeah, you should have." Adrian stood, walking around his desk until he was standing in front of her. "But I'm going to fix it." Lena crossed her arms. "How?" Adrian's expression hardened. "By making sure Natasha knows exactly who she's dealing with." The next morning, the company was buzzing for an entirely different reason. Because a new email had been sent to every employee from Adrian Kingston. It laid out the truth, how Lena had gotten her job, how she had earned her place, and how anyone spreading false information would have to answer directly to him. It was a clear message. And Natasha? She was furious. She stormed into Adrian's office, her perfectly curated mask of calm cracking for the first time. You humiliated me. Adrian didn't flinch. You humiliated yourself. Natasha gritted her teeth. This isn't over. Adrian just smirked. Yes, it is. Natasha left in a whirlwind of frustration. And when Lena walked into work that morning, the silence was gone. Because she had won. And this time, Adrian had been right there beside her. Alice had always believed that when life threw a problem at her, she could laugh her way through it. She had tackled disasters with a grin, turned chaos into opportunity, and somehow stumbled her way into Thomas Miller's heart. But this was different, because this time she might actually lose him. It started with a simple meeting request. Alice had been at her usual spot, her makeshift desk by the copier, trying and failing to unjam a paper tray while humming a song off key. Then Thomas's assistant had walked over, looking uneasy. Alice, Mr. Miller needs to see you now. Alice frowned. Okay, but if this is about me accidentally setting the break room coffee machine on fire, I want to clarify that it was an experiment. It's not about the coffee machine. Something in the assistant's voice made her stomach twist. Alice wiped her hands on her skirt and made her way to Thomas's office, her heartbeat uneven. She opened the door without knocking, because at this point, knocking was optional, and froze. Sitting across from Thomas, legs crossed, posture perfect, was Natasha Montgomery, and in her hand was a document that would ruin everything. Natasha turned at Alice's entrance, her red lips curling into a smirk. Oh, look, the entertainment has arrived. Alice rolled her eyes. Funny, I was just about to say the same about you. Thomas didn't laugh. His expression was hard, unreadable, and that was what worried Alice the most. She had seen him furious. She had seen him exasperated with her endless antics. But this was something else. Alice, sit down. His voice was calm, too calm. Alice slowly did as he asked, her hands clasped together tightly in her lap. Natasha took her time, flipping through the contract dramatically before placing it on Thomas's desk. So, darling, Natasha said, voice sweet as poison, have you told her yet? Alice raised an eyebrow. Told me what? Thomas let out a slow breath, his fingers tightening around the edge of his desk. The contract, he said quietly, between my family and Natasha's. Alice blinked. The business deal? The one you walked away from when you broke off the engagement? Thomas nodded. Natasha sighed theatrically. Yes, the very same one. But here's the problem, Alice. Thomas never really walked away. Not completely. Because there's a lovely little clause in this contract that states, if our marriage doesn't happen, his company, the empire he's worked so hard to build, will have to pay a little fine. She leaned forward, smile widening. A fine of $500 million. Alice's heart stopped. $500 million. She turned to Thomas, expecting him to laugh, to tell her Natasha was bluffing. But he didn't. He just sat there, shoulders tense, jaw clenched. Alice's stomach sank. Tell me she's lying. Thomas swallowed. She's not. Alice felt like she had been punched in the gut. Natasha wasn't here to win Thomas back. She was here to trap him, to force him into a choice, her or financial ruin. And Alice, she was the obstacle. She looked at Thomas again. So what now? He hesitated, and that hesitation broke her. Natasha smirked, sensing weakness. He's a businessman, Alice, she purred. And businessmen know that love is just a luxury, a distraction. He'll do what's best for the company, what's best for his legacy. He'll do what's expected of him. Alice's chest tightened, because the worst part, a tiny, awful part of her believed Natasha might be right. What if Thomas had only entertained their connection because it had been fun, a distraction from his high-pressure life? What if, when it really mattered, she wasn't enough? She stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. I won't make this decision for you, Thomas. Her voice shook, but she lifted her chin. But I'm not going to sit around and watch you hesitate. You either want me or you don't. Thomas stood too. Alice, but she was already walking out. And this time she didn't look back. For the first time in his life, Thomas felt powerless. He had spent years making tough choices, ensuring his company's success, protecting his family's name. But none of that mattered if it meant losing Alice, because Alice was more than just a distraction. She was the only person who had ever made him feel like himself. She made him laugh when life felt unbearable. She made him see the world beyond boardrooms and financial reports. And for the first time, he knew what he had to do. Alice had just stepped out of the building, her hands shaking, when she heard her name. Alice! She turned just as Thomas burst through the doors, running after her. The moment he reached her, he grabbed her face in his hands and kissed her. Right there in front of everyone. Natasha, the employees, the entire corporate world. He pulled away, breathless, eyes blazing. I choose you. Alice blinked, dazed. What about screw the contract, screw the money, screw everything else? His voice was hoarse but firm. I choose you, Alice. Only you. Natasha scoffed from behind them. You're making a mistake, Thomas. He didn't even look at her. No, the mistake would have been letting her go. Alice couldn't breathe. Because against all odds, he had chosen her. And as she kissed him back, right there in the middle of the street, she knew that nothing, not Natasha, not the company, not any contract, could ever take this away from them. Alice Carter had never been the type to back down. Sure, she was clumsy. Sure, she had a knack for causing disasters. Sure, she had accidentally set the office toaster on fire. Twice, but when it came to fighting for what was right, she was fearless. And today she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her name, her future, and the love she refused to let Natasha destroy. Alice didn't sleep that night. After Thomas had publicly chosen her, after Natasha had stormed off, Alice knew this wasn't over. Because Natasha Montgomery wasn't the type to lose gracefully. She was vindictive, cunning, and obsessed with control. And if Alice didn't strike first, Natasha would. So she did what she did best. She went full chaos mode. She pulled every favor, called in every connection, and gathered every piece of evidence she could find. And by morning, she was ready. The company's largest shareholder meeting was happening today. Executives, investors, and the media would all be there. And Natasha, she would use this moment to manipulate the narrative, to make herself the victim, to paint Alice as an opportunist, and to make Thomas look like a fool. But Alice had a different plan. She walked into the boardroom with confidence, carrying a laptop filled with everything she needed to end this. Natasha was already there, dressed in white, like some kind of corporate angel, flashing a practiced, insincere smile. Alice took a seat, met Natasha's gaze, and grinned. Showtime. Natasha stood up first, feigning heartbreak. Ladies and gentlemen, I won't take up much of your time, she said, voice dripping with false humility. Alice rolled her eyes. Here we go. Natasha sighed dramatically. It's come to my attention that certain people have been misleading this company. People who do not belong here. People who are only here because of manipulation and deception. Lena didn't blink. I agree, she said. I agree, she said, standing up. And I'd love to prove just how right you are. Natasha's smile faltered for just a second. Alice turned to the giant presentation screen, plugging in her laptop. Before anyone makes decisions about who belongs in this company, let's take a little trip down memory lane, shall we? She clicked play, and suddenly, the boardroom was filled with the sound of Natasha's own voice. A video played on the screen. Natasha at a high-end party, wine in hand, laughing with her friends. The audio was crystal clear. Oh, Thomas, please. He was never in control of anything. I could have made him do whatever I wanted. The room fell into stunned silence. Then another clip. Natasha bragging to a friend saying, if I can't have him, I'll make sure no one else does. Watch me ruin that little nobody. She'll be gone in a week. Gasps filled the boardroom. Alice turned to Natasha, who had gone pale. Care to explain? Natasha stood frozen, mouth opening and closing like a fish. That was taken out of context, she finally sputtered. Alice tilted her head. Out of context, so you didn't say it? Natasha glared. That's not what I meant. Alice shrugged. Funny, 'cause it sounded pretty clear to me. The investors started whispering. The board members looked furious. And Thomas? He was watching Alice with awe in his eyes. Because she had done it. She had beaten Natasha at her own game. Alice wasn't done yet. She stepped forward, voice calm but powerful. This company deserves a leader who makes decisions based on integrity, not manipulation. And that leader? She turned to Thomas. It's him, not you, Natasha. Never you. Natasha's face twisted in rage. She turned to the investors, her last hope. Are you really going to listen to her? A nobody? One of the board members stood up. Actually, yes, because unlike you, she's honest. Natasha lost it. She grabbed her purse, flung her hair over her shoulder, and stormed toward the door. But before she left, she turned to Alice one last time. You think this is over? She hissed. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Alice smiled, completely unfazed. Oh, honey, she said sweetly, I think you're the one who had no idea who you were dealing with. And with that, Natasha was gone. For the first time in weeks, Alice could finally breathe. The rumors were gone. Her name was cleared. And as she turned toward Thomas, she knew she had done something even bigger. She had proven that she wasn't just chaos. She was strong. She was capable. She belonged here. And no one, especially not Natasha, would ever take that away from her again. As the room cleared out, Thomas walked over to Alice. His expression was soft, his usual composed mask nowhere to be seen. Alice, she raised an eyebrow. Yes, boss? He chuckled. You are absolutely terrifying. She grinned. I know. And then he kissed her, right there in the middle of the boardroom, in front of anyone who might still be watching. Alice felt her heart skip a beat, because this wasn't just a victory. This was the start of something real. Something Natasha could never touch. Something worth fighting for. What do you think of Alice's victory? Should she celebrate with an extra snack? Comment below. If you believe in standing up for yourself no matter what, hit that like button for Alice's epic win. Subscribe for more exciting stories, romantic moments, and unpredictable twists. You won't want to miss what happens next. Alice Carter had faced corporate sabotage, whispered rumors, and enough workplace disasters to fill an entire sitcom. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for this moment. Because Thomas Miller, the CEO of Kingston Enterprises, was about to confess his feelings for her. And Alice? She was about to ruin it in the most spectacular way possible. It had started as a simple company event, a formal gala meant to celebrate Kingston Enterprises' latest success. Alice had begrudgingly agreed to go after Thomas insisted. You're my employee, he had said. It's important for you to be there. But Alice knew better. Thomas never invited employees to these things. And yet, he had invited her. So after much internal debate and a full-blown existential crisis in front of her mirror, she put on the only fancy dress she owned and showed up. The event was everything Alice hated, stiff, pretentious, filled with people who looked like they had been born wearing designer suits. She spent most of the night dodging reporters, awkwardly eating tiny hors d'oeuvres, and making conversation with people who clearly had no idea why she was there. But then, Thomas found her, and suddenly, everything felt different. Dance with me, Thomas said, appearing at her side with a glass of champagne. Alice nearly choked on her drink. You, dancing? That's new. He smirked. Don't get used to it. Before she could protest, he took her hand and pulled her onto the dance floor. Alice had zero experience with ballroom dancing, and yet, being in Thomas's arms felt strangely right. You look beautiful tonight, he murmured. Alice stumbled. What? Thomas chuckled, steadying her. I said you look beautiful. Alice narrowed her eyes. Did you hit your head? Are you running a fever? Should I call a doctor? He sighed. Alice! She swallowed. There was something in his voice, something she had never heard before, something that made her heart race. You drive me insane, you know that? He said, twirling her gently. Alice snorted. I consider that my greatest achievement. But Thomas wasn't laughing. I'm serious. Alice felt her stomach twist. Thomas, I tried to fight it, he continued, eyes locked on hers. Tried to convince myself that this, whatever this is, was just some passing thing. He exhaled slowly, but I was wrong. I stopped breathing. What are you saying? She whispered. He looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. I'm saying I want you, Alice. Silence. Complete, overwhelming silence. And then Alice's heel got caught on the hem of her dress. She tripped forward, knocking into Thomas, sending them both crashing to the floor in the middle of the dance floor. Gasps rippled through the room as Alice landed half on top of Thomas, her dress tangled around her legs, her hands pressed against his chest. For a second, she was too stunned to move. Then, she started laughing. Uncontrollable, belly-aching laughter. Because, of course, this was how her life worked. A beautiful romantic confession, ruined, a dreamy slow dance, turned into a public disaster. And yet, Thomas was laughing too. Not his usual dry, sarcastic chuckle, but a real, genuine laugh. And that's when Alice knew. He wasn't just saying things, he meant it. He liked her. Despite her clumsiness, her case, her ability to turn every situation into a mess, he still wanted her. And that thought, it terrified her. Alice finally sat up, brushing her hair out of her face. You sure you want me? She asked, voice teasing but laced with uncertainty. Thomas smirked, still lying on the floor. Pretty sure, yeah. Alice bit her lip. You know, I'll probably ruin everything, right? He tilted his head. I'm counting on it. Her heart thundered in her chest, and then he reached for her. It was slow, deliberate, like he was giving her time to pull away. But she didn't. Their faces were inches apart, his breath warm against her skin. Alice closed her eyes. She was ready. And then, someone cleared their throat loudly. Alice snapped her eyes open. Standing over them was Thomas's father, along with half the board members. Alice froze. Thomas sighed. Of course, he muttered. Perfect timing. The moment was gone, but something had changed between them. And as Thomas helped Alice to her feet, brushing dirt off his suit, he leaned in and whispered, This isn't over, Carter. Alice shivered because she knew he meant it, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. She was ready. Thomas Miller had spent his entire life following a plan. Every decision, every business move, every step forward had been calculated, precise, controlled. And then came Alice Carter, a walking disaster, a storm wrapped in laughter, a woman who defied logic and order. And somehow, she became his entire world. Now, as he sat in his office, staring at the engagement ring in his hand, he realized one thing. There was no more plan. Because love wasn't something he could control, and he didn't want to anymore. He just wanted Alice, and he was going to prove it to her in the only way she would truly understand. Most men would plan a romantic dinner, a candle-lit rooftop, or a grand, elegant event for a proposal. Thomas Miller? He filled his entire office with snacks. It was absolute chaos, exactly how Alice liked it. Her favorite cheese puffs were stacked into a tower on his desk. A sea of colorful, sticky notes covered the walls, each one with a little memory, a little reason why he loved her. And right in the middle of it all, a handwritten note that simply read, Will you marry me? Thomas stood in the center of the madness, arms crossed, waiting for the hurricane that was about to walk through his door. And right on cue, Alice Carter burst into the office. Alice froze in the doorway. Her eyes widened as she took in the snack-filled, color-exploding office. For a full 5 seconds, she didn't move. Then she gasped, loudly, Oh my God! And then she laughed, hard, because of course this was how Thomas Miller would propose. Not with roses, not with fancy speeches, but with snacks, sticky notes, and absolute beautiful chaos. She clutched her stomach, gasping between fits of laughter. Thomas, what is this? He smirked, hands in his pockets. A proposal. Alice blinked, and then, for the first time in her life, she was speechless. Thomas took a slow step toward her, pulling the ring from his pocket. His usual cool, composed demeanor was gone. In its place was a man completely and utterly in love. Alice, he said, his voice quieter now, I know you think I'm insane for doing this, but honestly, the real insanity would be letting you go. Alice stared at him, heart pounding. You've turned my world upside down, he continued. You make me laugh when I least expect it. You challenge me in ways no one ever has. And I don't want a life where you're not causing chaos next to me. He took her hand in his thumb tracing slow circles against her skin. Marry me, Alice. Silence, and then Alice sniffled. Oh, no, she mumbled, rubbing at her eyes. You made me cry. How dare you? Thomas chuckled. That's a yes, then? Alice bit her lips, staring at him like she couldn't believe this was real. And then she grinned. I'll marry you. Thomas let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. But Alice held up a finger. I have one condition. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Oh? Alice nodded, dead serious. I want a hammock in our living room. Silence. And then Thomas laughed, because of course she would say that. Deal. And with that, he slid the ring onto her finger. And Alice, she jumped into his arms, knocking over an entire stack of cheese puffs in the process. By the next morning, everyone in the office knew. Did you hear? The boss proposed to Alice. Wait, how did he propose? With snacks. That checks out. Alice walked into the office wearing the biggest grin, flashing her engagement ring to literally anyone who made eye contact. Thomas? He just shook his head, watching her with a look that was all warmth and amusement, because this was his life now. A life filled with laughter, chaos, and the woman who had made him feel alive again. And honestly, he wouldn't change a single thing. The wedding of Alice Carter and Thomas Miller was never going to be ordinary. There would be no stiff formality, no cold traditions, no perfectly rehearsed moments. Because Alice wasn't that kind of bride, and Thomas wasn't that kind of groom. Their love had been built on chaos, laughter, and 1,000 little moments that made no sense but felt right anyway. And today? Today was about celebrating exactly that. The wedding morning started with disaster, which if you knew Alice, wasn't surprising at all. First, her dress zipper got stuck, leaving her half-dressed, hopping around the room like a confused flamingo while her bridesmaids tried to fix it. Then her hairstylist, who had been booked months in advance, canceled at the last second, leaving Alice with two options. Panic, grab a brush, some hairpins, and hope for the best. She chose option 2. By the time she was finally dressed, her bouquet was missing, her shoes were on the wrong feet, and she had somehow managed to spill coffee on the sleeve of her dress. This wedding is cursed, she groaned. Her best friend Mia rolled her eyes. Alice, please. You tripped into Thomas's life, survived corporate sabotage, and turned a billionaire's world upside down. You can handle a coffee stain. Alice snorted. Yeah, well, I'd rather trip into marriage without looking like a disaster. Mia handed her a napkin. Sweetheart, you are a disaster, but you're his disaster, and that's why this is going to be perfect. Alice smiled, because Mia Wei was right. This day, flaws, mess, and all, was still going to be perfect. Thomas Miller, the man who had spent his life planning everything down to the second, was nervous. And not because he was unsure. No, he had never been more certain of anything in his life. But as he stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie for the 10th time, he realized Alice had changed him. The old Thomas would have wanted a perfect, elegant wedding, free of surprises. But this Thomas, the one who had fallen in love with a girl who couldn't walk down a hallway without knocking something over, he wanted exactly the kind of wedding that matched their love, imperfect, unpredictable, and full of laughter. His best man, Daniel, leaned against the doorframe. You ready? Thomas smirked. I've been ready since the day she ran into my office and knocked over my lamp. Daniel chuckled. Good, because I just got a text from Alice's side and, there's been some minor complications. Thomas sighed. Of course there have. But even as he walked toward the altar, all he could think was, this was exactly how it was meant to be. The venue was beautiful. An outdoor garden lit with fairy lights and surrounded by friends, family, and curious onlookers who just wanted to see what kind of disaster Alice would cause. And they weren't disappointed. Because when Alice finally walked down the aisle, she tripped on the carpet halfway through. There was a collective gasp. Someone screamed in horror. And then Alice just stood up, brushed herself off, and kept walking like nothing had happened. She's okay, someone shouted. and the whole crowd erupted into laughter and applause. Thomas, he just shook his head, smiling, because of course his bride would trip at her own wedding. And of course she would laugh it off like it was the best thing that had ever happened. When she finally reached him, her cheeks were red from laughing. "I was aiming for dramatic, but I think I overdid it," she whispered. Thomas chuckled. "Don't ever change." Thomas went first, and for a man who once struggled with emotions, his words made the entire crowd melt. "Alice, I spent my whole life thinking that success meant control, that love was something neat and structured, something that fit into a perfect plan. And then you happened. You showed me that the best things in life aren't planned. They're messy, unpredictable, and absolutely wonderful. I promise to love you in every moment, even the chaotic ones, especially the chaotic ones, because without you, my life would be painfully boring." Alice sniffled loudly, and then it was her turn. She cleared her throat, unfolded a piece of paper, and began. "Thomas, when I first met you, I thought you were a robot in a fancy suit. A ridiculously handsome robot, but a robot nonetheless. You were cold, serious, and a little scary. And now you're still ridiculously handsome, but you're also the best thing that's ever happened to me. You make me laugh, you believe in me, and most importantly, you put up with my nonsense. So I promise to keep making you laugh, to keep loving you, and to keep bringing snacks into your office when you forget to eat. And I also promise to try not to trip on a daily basis. But let's be real, I probably will." The guests laughed and cried all at once. And when they exchanged rings, Alice held up her hand dramatically. "Look at that. I got a billionaire to marry me. Someone update my LinkedIn." Most wedding receptions were elegant, refined, predictable. Alice and Thomas's. It started with Alice accidentally knocking over the wedding cake. It continued with Thomas dancing terribly, only to have Alice join him and somehow make it worse. At one point, an entire food fight broke out between Alice's side of the family and Thomas's business colleagues. And the best part, Thomas laughed through all of it, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving, he was living. And Alice was right there, living it with him. As the night came to an end, Alice and Thomas sat together under the fairy lights, away from the crowd. Alice rested her head on his shoulder, sighing happily. "We did it," she murmured. Thomas smirked. "You mean you survived your own wedding?" Alice giggled. "Barely." He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Alice." She smiled. "I love you too, robot man." And as they sat there, messy, exhausted, and completely in love, they both knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of a lifetime of laughter, love, and beautiful, beautiful chaos. What do you think of Alice and Thomas's love story? Would you survive a wedding like this? Comment below. If you believe love should be full of laughter and joy, hit that like button to support them. Subscribe for more heartwarming, chaotic, and unforgettable love stories. You won't want to miss what happens next.